This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod. I'm Tony Pesta, and joining me today to discuss the Cleveland Cavaliers' red-hot start to the season is my co-host Jackson Flickinger and friend of the show, James from Everything Cavs. Now, James has great stuff on Twitter for all of you Cavs sickos to follow, so I'm excited to have him back on the show. And how have you been feeling with this start to the season?
I've been great. Can't really complain too much. A couple double-digit wins, beating up on teams we're supposed to, so vibes are high right now. There's nothing to complain about.
The vibes really are great, and it's always great to have you on the show. Jackson, I have a question for you.
Oh, no.
Have you noticed? So the Cavs are 2-0, and despite 2 wins, there has been a lack of a certain chain or award that has been given out after either game. Have you noticed this?
I have noticed this. I've tried to pretend that I don't see it, but, we are not rebranding. We are always the Junkyard Pod. We are a podcast that was really dedicated to JB Bickerstaff. So, we gotta, we really got to keep that going.
The Junkyard Dog lives on forever through the Junkyard Pod. And we started this pod because me and Jackson just love JB Bickerstaff so much. We were like, we have to talk about him on camera for 30 minutes a day.
We can see if, like, Lamar Stevens, he may have some time.
He might not be busy right now. Surprisingly.
So that's something to also consider as well.
Yeah, but listen, we got plenty of stuff to talk about today, so I'm ready to get us right into it. So last night, former Cavalier head coach JB makes his return to Cleveland with the Detroit Pistons, and he received mixed reactions from the crowd. Some cheers, some boos. I would have cheered. But, I don't want to focus on that part of the discourse because I would rather use this as an opportunity to talk about Cleveland's new head coach, Kenny Atkinson, and how he has implemented a new vision for this team. Now, I would say he's off to a pretty good start. But, Jackson, what have you seen from the way that Atkinson is coaching this team, and how does it differ from JB?
I think everyone is just playing with a better sense of purpose on the offensive side of the ball. And I think the one person that really, oddly enough, the one person that I think exemplifies this most, besides like Mobley, is Caris LeVert, honestly. Caris has been doing a lot of the same things, but he's doing it like quicker and with a sense of purpose, and everything around him is like making more sense. And I think that's one of the things that we thought of is like, oh, Kenny's just going to make him play faster. They're going to shoot a bunch of threes. And I'm not sure what their 3-point numbers were yesterday, but it hasn't really translated to like, oh, they're shooting threes like the Boston Celtics. But what it has done is just created an offense where it seems like it's allowing everybody to be the best version of themselves, including Caris LeVert, which is something that, Tony definitely didn't see coming because, he's the biggest. He's been trying to trade Caris LeVert forever. So that's one of the things that I think noticed it.
This is good for that agenda because now his value is going up. But LeVert has been very good. Kenny has definitely revamped his role. And in a weird way, this might sound stupid, like it doesn't make sense. Hopefully it does. Because everyone in Atkinson's offense has a larger role, like the group has more of a role, the individual responsibilities seem like they're less glaring. Like LeVert isn't being asked. There's not lineups where LeVert is like the only ball handler on the court. And it's like, Caris LeVert time. It's like, no, this is 5 people playing basketball and Caris LeVert happens to be one of them. So I've been happy with the way he's playing.
On media day, I tried to ask as many people as possible, like, hey, how is your role going to change under Kenny? And the first person I asked was Caris, and Caris said, it's not going to change at all. And I said, okay, cool. But you see that it's not really changing, but it's just like, it's different. And I'm having a hard time articulating it. I've tried to like talk it through with multiple people, but it's something to definitely keep an eye on. But as a larger point, I think that exemplifies how everybody is playing, where like everyone is playing with a greater sense of purpose, that even if their individual game isn't changing too much, their place within the offense is just elevated a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's well said. James, how would you grade Kenny Atkinson through 2 games so far?
I mean, I'd have to go an A. I don't think we can really go below that because they're 2-0, double-digit wins, and there's not really anything to complain about on the Atkinson end. I think he's still trying to figure out the rotations and stuff, and maybe the Okoro usage can maybe get him in a little earlier, I think. But again, trying to figure it out with playing 10, 11 guys, it's hard to get all these guys minutes. To jump off what Jackson was saying, my interpretation is everyone's just more decisive. And it's just really the identity of the team to keep the advantage. They're doing a really good job at creating the initial one and maintaining it as they collapse the defense, kick it out. It's the 0.5 rule, right? You either shoot it, you pass it, or you drive it. It's not waiting around and seeing what's happening. It's making a decision quick and living with it. The possessions don't feel like every possession doesn't feel as, I guess, valuable in this offense, it seems, because they're playing with more pace, more tempo. And even on something I love is even on like when Detroit scores, they're getting the ball out. Darius or Donovan are at free throw line extended already. They're getting across half court in 2 seconds and they're getting into their stuff. Those little things matter, and it's becoming the identity of this team where they're a sum of their parts. Everyone's being empowered to make plays, whether it's scoring, whether it's doing anything really. There's no really role restrictions, it seems, versus in JB's offense where it's Okoro just sits right corner all the time. There's just more freedom, more fluidity to it, and it's just really refreshing to see the new identity of this team.
Yeah, and to that point, I think when it comes to like the role players, especially making decisions, it feels like they are now being given the chance to make decisions. Like in the past, if Okoro or Dean Wade or one of those players took a shot, it was because it felt like, well, Darius and Donovan decided that it was their turn to shoot the ball. Like they gave it to them wide open in the corner this time. Now it feels like if Wade takes a shot, it's because he's open and he's playing within the flow of the offense. Like they have a little bit more freedom to do these things. And again, like that's one of the big differences between how JB coached this team, where it felt very heliocentric. It felt your turn, my turn. Now everyone is more involved. The other thing that I think is a big difference for me, again, it's 2 games, so we'll see how this all plays out. But Kenny seems like he's taking a modern approach with this team. We hear him talk about analytics, lineup data, tracking stats. I think he clearly wants a forward-thinking approach with this team, whether that's how he's using the core 4 or how he's handled the rotation. Like he's really dug deep into that bench both games so far. He's playing these guys in quick shifts, which I really love. And he's experimenting with all kinds of different lineups, searching for what does and doesn't work for this team. So I think that's a big difference. And the last thing, I like that he seems willing to adjust on the fly. Last night in the third quarter, we saw Cade Cunningham was really heating up. He had 12 points in that quarter. He went ahead and he adjusts and he decides to start blitzing him on pick and rolls. And Cade finishes with just 3 points the rest of the way. So it's little things like that, adjusting your strategy to fit the moment, that felt like we didn't see that often under JB.
One thing I do want to point out, kind of back to your second point about the rotations, one thing that I think is interesting is that, if you watch the Cavs, Donovan and Jarrett Allen, that's a good combination. Evan Mobley and Darius Garland, that's a good combination. One of the things that Kenny's done is, I know he knows that those are the good combinations, but especially last night, I don't believe Donovan and Allen played too much together. He was trying to get Mitchell and Mobley, tried to line them up, tried to get Allen and Garland lined up. And I think he's really using, especially the beginning of this regular season, as kind of a rehearsal, like trying to work out all the kinks between those, 2 parts there. And I think that's really interesting and really important, because he knows that if this team's ever going to reach its ceiling, it's because all 4 of those guys are completely in sync and not just kind of, good with certain lineups and not with others.
There's a conspiracy, like if you want to get really weird with this, like just switching the duos. I mean, we don't have to talk about it because there's no need to, but if there's a move to be made, who are the 2 guys that are going to stay, right? And they were the worst duo last year, net rating wise, I think. And last thing on the JB versus Kenny thing, it feels like Kenny is a process guy and JB is a results guy, which again, it's refreshing. You see the Pistons are down 14 and Cade continues to drive baseline and, cook in the mid range. It's like, cool. Like, that's fine. He's efficient with it, but you're down 17 points and still settling for like one-on-one mid-range jumpers. Like, we'll live with that. So it's not going to beat us. So that's another thing I really like about Kenny's approach.
Yeah, poor Cade. He doesn't have a lot to work with. It's a rough roster there that they have. Like, I understand people are optimistic, and I do actually like JB's fit with Detroit from like a culture setting standpoint, but like it just
they got some things to figure out.
It doesn't like just a lot of picks on guys who don't seem to do a whole lot of things well. And that's just like, it doesn't really make sense to me. So, that's
they got a good, they have a good defensive core, but yeah, that is a separate conversation.
They don't have a good defensive core. That's the thing. They don't. Like, I don't want to hear anybody say
let's stay on Cavs corner.
It's not.
Detroit corner yet. Let's stay on Cavs corner. We'll start our Pistons pod to keep up with the JB beat later in the season. There's one more point that I want to hit on before we transition to our next topic, which is that I won't go into the conspiracy with the Mobley Donovan fit, but I do think it is important because anyone who watched the Cavs, or even if you don't watch the Cavs, you can tell that the future of this franchise is pretty dependent on Mitchell and Mobley. So it's probably important that those two guys can play together. And under JB, it kind of seemed like he just settled for like, well, again, like process over results type of thing. Kenny seems to be going for the process. JB took the results of like, well, Allen and Mitchell are really good, so we're just going to stick with that, and we're not going to try and figure out this other combination. Kenny, it seemed like he's trying to figure out, okay, why isn't Mitchell and Mobley working, and how can we make it work? Because that's going to be important. And I think that's a good way to just go ahead and transition to probably the biggest standout from the first two games, and that would be Evan Mobley. James, is this the year that this finally happens? Is he finally going to break out? How are we feeling about Mobley's start to the season?
I think this is the beginning of it, just because we're seeing him play with more freedom. And again, Kenny's empowering all these guys to be able to make these plays off the bounce, and just giving him more opportunity should equal more production. And yeah, I think just him being okay, like taking a pull-up three when a guy goes under last night, that's unheard of with him the last couple of years. Just allowing the leash to get a little bit longer and not killing a guy for making mistakes or taking not a great shot. You have to give him room to roam, because if you don't, like what we saw the last couple of years, and you just, like, he's obviously really good as a roller, sitting in the dunker spot, doing all that stuff, but there's a limit to that. When your franchise's ceiling is exclusively tied to this one player, you have to let him venture out a little bit. One thing I would like to see, I think on his drives, especially off of these inverted ball screens, he's picking up his dribble a little too early. There was an example in either the third or fourth quarter last night. He comes off, and Jalen Duren's a strong guy, obviously, but he picks up his dribble outside the paint, and he just kind of stuck there versus keeping it alive, flipping shoulders, and kind of working the middle. And that maybe that stuff he'll figure out as he goes. But I can't complain about Evan at all. I think last night, again, we saw a little more what it has been, the 13 to 14 shot attempts. I think he had 14 or 15 points, but I don't expect the volume to increase too much compared to last year, because again, the team is different in terms of what they're trying to do. I don't think anyone's going to dominate shot attempts necessarily, but just getting him in advantageous positions to work on creating for himself and others versus just feeding him lobs. That, again, that's a process over results thing that allows him to grow there.
One thing, I definitely agree with everything that you're saying. One thing I do want to figure out is, can his ball handling and stuff work when he's playing against like a real NBA defense, not whatever, the best defense in the world, as Tony is saying with the Detroit Pistons, is throwing out there.
They have some good defenders.
They do not.
Just said they have some good defenders.
Sure. I want to see how that looks when he's going. So this next week, he's going to be going up against, he's going to be going up against the Knicks. And I know it's a very different Knicks team, but I feel like they really gave him problems in the playoffs anytime he put the ball on the ground. And that's something that I'd like to see him, overcome against that team. He's going up against Anthony Davis. After that, he has the Bucks. So it's like he's going to be going up against, I know the Bucks aren't a great defense, but guys who have size inside and real size that could really bother him. So I want to see if he's able to carry that aggressiveness over that attacking off the dribble, that bringing the ball up the court when he's going up against, stronger individual matchups.
Yeah, I don't want to, rain on the Mobley parade or anything, but it is important that we see him continue to look like this against those better defensive teams, especially better defensive front courts. Like, even the Bucks, they're not a great defensive team anymore, but Giannis and Brook are still pretty tough guys down there. So that'll be a tough matchup for him. Obviously, Anthony Davis. I thought Mobley was incredible that first game of the season. The second game, he wasn't as sharp, but he still looked more confident and comfortable than 90% of the previous games he's played. So it's still a clear step in the right direction. Here's a stat that I want to pull up that I'm hoping, everyone here and in the comments will be responsible with advanced analytics and small sample sizes. But through 2 games, the Cavs are a plus 12 when Mobley is at power forward, and they're a plus 54 when Mobley is at center. They have an offensive rating of 140 when Mobley is at the 5.
And that's net rating. That's not
net rating.
Minus.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So
and
I'm just going to say, if you're asking people to be responsible with small sample size advanced stats, that's really on you, because
I know,
if you were responsible, you wouldn't have brought it up.
I know I'm kind of leading people here, but it's really not meant to be an anti-too big agenda at all. It's just something we're going to be monitoring this because the Cavs outlook does change if Mobley's a monster at center. So it's something to keep an eye on.
Well, the starters, I believe, I haven't checked cleaning the glass. I don't know if it's different, but I think they're at a +1 net rating. They're not doing their damage with the starters. So even though I really like Dean Wade's fit with the starters conceptually, it hasn't translated in 2 games. So that's probably where a lot of that noise with your stats coming from.
Yeah, who cares? What's the point of bringing up a 2-game sample size if we can't get carried away?
I mean, and Ty Jerome, and Ty Jerome's probably
we're gonna get to
a lot
him.
of times.
We're gonna get to Ty Jerome.
So really, that's a Ty Jerome stat.
We'll get there very soon. The point is, this is something that obviously we're going to be watching throughout the year. So far, Mobley is playing the center more than he has before. He's playing 49% of his minutes there, which is up from 44% the year before. Again, small sample size. Only bringing it up because we're going to be watching for it. And to add some even more nuance to that, again, it might look different when the Cavs aren't playing the Pistons and the Raptors. So it's going to look different, actually. So let's wait and see. But whether or not Mobley continues to blossom, that's still the defining question of the season. So far through 2 games, he's averaging 20.5 points, 7.5 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, and 2.5 blocks. If he keeps that stat line anywhere near that range, I think he's a lock for the All-Star game, and the Cavs ceiling gets that much higher.
Last thing on Evan, keep your freaking pivot foot down, dude. I know a lot of people were complaining about it, but 2 of the 3 were bad, where he's probably just used to in training or open gym, nobody's really calling anything. And the pivot foot really moves when he pumps and goes. Just sink the hips, anchor your hips, push off the back foot. Do a negative step. I know people say it's a bad thing. It is not. Just be more sound a little bit there. That's frustrating.
I'm glad you brought that up because we almost completely forgot that.
Also, does he carry every time he dribbles?
Absolutely. It's kind of bad.
His brother Isaiah did the same thing where it's dude, I don't know. Every time you would watch a G League game, the other team's coach would be this, he's doing it. He's not dribbling.
Just a pocket dribble.
I don't know. His hands
it's open for interpretation.
His hands 80% underneath the ball. So it's pretty,
okay.
But
the travels are a concern though. I really think, because I had the same thought. I was next summer or even just in practice, they just need someone in the Cavs practice courts who is blowing the whistle every time Mobley does it, because you got to break that habit. He's done it throughout his career. It's not even a new thing.
The dribbling is Isaiah Thomas-like.
All right, well, now that we have finished our Mobley propaganda, let's really start getting crazy here, because we got to talk about Dean Wade and Ty Jerome. And whenever we talk about Dean Wade, I like to just let Jackson cook just go ISO whenever that opportunity presents itself. So go ahead. You have the floor.
Dean Wade, this is what we've been saying. You are seeing the prophecy come true. Everything that I've said is correct. One thing that I thought Dean Wade said last night that was pretty interesting, because every time he has a game where he actually shoots the ball, all the questions are like, Dean Wade, do you have confidence in yourself now? Which is kind of a weird question to ask. But one of the things that he said is that the increased spacing, like everybody kind of being in a predetermined spot. We talked about how they've had like tape on the court and everything on their practice courts, trying to make sure that everybody is positioned correctly. He said that the better position spacing kind of helps him, feel more confident to pull the trigger and kind of see when he should be shooting as opposed to when he should be passing out of it. And I think that's something that's really interesting. We'll see if that continues, but if he's able to like quickly make those decisions like we saw last night, that would be a good thing.
The biggest thing there for me, I feel like in the past we haven't had guys that are comfortable shooting over kind of a late closeout, where it feels like we see it all the time in the NBA. If you watch Boston the first night of the season, it feels like they got a lot of open shots, but if you're a half step late, the ball's going up. I feel like that's something that's changed so far this year with Dean. And defensively, his hands have been so active. That's one thing I've noticed in general. It's they're really putting pressure on drives and they're digging at the ball hard. So that's something I've really enjoyed from Dean as well.
He is such a good defender, and I say this every podcast. You cannot say I don't think you can stress enough how good of a defender he is. He's really, like, without sounding too hyperbolic, he's one of the best wing defenders in the league, and his versatility that allows him to comfortably play the 5, I think, is really underrated, and he's a phenomenal rebounder. He's just always in the right spot. He's helping off the right guys. He's closing back out to the correct guys. He just has a really good understanding of who's on the court and where he should be, and he has very active hands. So it's just, he's been really good the past couple of years, even though the offense has been very bad. And if the offense is good, like we saw last night, and it's, he has the skills to be a good offensive player, it just changes, I think, the trajectory of really the starting lineup, as long as he's in it.
Yeah. I mean, Wade was fantastic on both ends of the floor last night, really active on the glass. I think he only finished with like 4 or 5 rebounds, but he was like fighting for every one. Kenny, after the game, said that Wade is one of the great finds of the last 10 years. Maybe add a 0 to that. One of the best finds the last 100 years. No, I'm just kidding. But theoretical
Wade, I'm taking Wade. Please cut that out and put it on Twitter.
No, too late.
Edit it,
Oh, you mean like
and
put share it just that part?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. That's
okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, Wade versus Jokic. I'm taking Wade.
All right.
But yeah,
theoretical Wade has been a very good fit, though. It's just now that theory is finally being put into place. Like now we're actually seeing some of this. Again, 2 games, small sample size. We'll find out. To pivot here and talk about Ty Jerome, I'm going to keep it short. I told everyone, Ty Jerome, he might surprise you, and I have been vindicated. So that's all I have to say. He's been good to start the season.
Has Craig Porter Jr. surprised you?
Yeah, actually, just not in a good way.
Okay.
If you told me in December of last year that we would be where we are right now with Craig Porter, I would be a little disappointed. It's not over yet, but it has not been a good 6 months for Porter, as we've said a couple times on this pod. Anyone else want to chime in? What has Ty Jerome been showing? He's been great so far.
Jerome's been great. He looks like, I think what's been so good is he plays with the correct pace for this team. It reminds me of, I think Ricky Rubio is such an easy comp for him, just, and I think it's kind of a lazy comp, honestly. But one of the things that Rubio did so well with the Cavs is he kind of like forced like his understanding of when to push the pace and when not to push the pace, when to get certain guys involved, when to not get certain guys involved is really what made him so good. And I think Ty Jerome does a lot of that. My big question with Jerome is where does he fit in the rotation once Max Strus is back? Because right now I would rather have him in the rotation than, my guy Sam. So that hurts me to say, but Jerome has just been so impressive.
Took a lot for you to say that.
It did. but we can just cut out Isaac. We can just cut him out. And
I do have a PSA for Isaac later on. But James, what have you seen from Jerome?
I've loved everything I've seen from Ty so far. I was with Tony this summer on the Jerome Island, that he would make an impact for this team. And I mentioned earlier about how it feels like guys are a lot better at maintaining advantages. He is the epitome of that. Just catching the ball and immediately driving on the catch, maintaining the scrambling defense. That is huge. It just keeps the offense flowing. And his weird, just his slow steps and change of pace is so different from anything on this team we've seen as well. So that's something you have to account for. That's how he's gotten a lot of these weird floaters and stuff. And he's a point guard. You don't really think about it. His versatility, being able to play on or off the ball, it's so important. It gives safety blanket if we're having a bad Karras game. As in the past, it's been so reliant on Karras if one of the guards are out or one of them isn't playing well. Now, if Karras isn't playing well, you can go to Ty and be like, hey, we need a good 6 minutes. Keep this offense going. Let's get some juice. He can absolutely do that for you.
I was about to make a rude comment about Darius's play when you said, nice to have a point guard out there. But I don't want to do that because I'm actually been really impressed with Darius, even though the numbers have been quite poor. I think his relocation, the pace that he's playing at, is the process is super good with Darius. And I just really want to see him put it all together and just have a game where he's actually making shots outside of the first 2 minutes.
Yeah, I agree. I think the process has been good for Darius. Hopefully those results come soon. And as for Jerome, he's just a very decisive player. That deacceleration when he changes speeds is honestly very impressive. And so I've been pleased with the way he's played. Quick note to wrap up this episode: as someone who has a vested interest in Okoro Island, I have no official statement other than we are monitoring the situation, and we'll get back to you in December, maybe, because it's been a little quiet start. I've been waiting for that Okoro breakout for some years now, and I think he's playing better. I think his new role is much more inclusive, and he's not standing in the corner. He doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. He's not just doing nothing out there. He looks like a basketball player. He made a couple nice passes in last night's game, but he's been very quiet. His minutes are way down. He's not even getting into the game till 10 minutes in the second quarter. So his role is definitely reduced. I think we'll probably see him get more opportunities in games where they need his defense. They haven't quite needed that just yet. But yeah, we'll be getting back to you. Okoro Island will have a better statement, a better judgment of where he stands on this team in maybe about a month.
I do want to pause the panic with Okoro. I think that it's important to keep in mind that he was a late addition to this team in terms of he wasn't able to practice and do a lot of the offseason workouts and stuff that most of the rest of the team did with Atkinson. So one of the things that Atkinson has mentioned with him when he talks about Isaac is that he's still figuring out how to use him because he hasn't really had him in the building for as long as he's had some of the other people. And I think that's probably why you're seeing the minutes the way that they are. And you are seeing they are it seems like he is being used in a lot of the same ways where it's he's standing in the corner and stuff, but they're slowly adding things. I think one of the things that's really important is that a lot of his cuts last year, it seemed like he would take the first 2 or 3 steps hard and then just kind of, slow down when it got to the paint. Now you see him cutting through to the dunker spot on the opposite side. And that's where a lot of his best plays, especially against the Pistons, came from. So I think we should just be super patient with Okoro as he's fitting into this new system. I think that he's not as bad as his 2.5 points per game would lead you to believe if you're just looking at the box score. So, be patient. We will check back in December to have an official statement.
Yeah, I think you can't box score watch with Ice. I mean, we all know that. It feels like he makes so many winning plays, like the 2 acrobatic, kickouts he had yesterday, and then the charge he took on Cade late to kind of put out their comeback attempt. Just little stuff like that really matters. And again, it's tough to find a lot of minutes when you're playing 11 guys. And I think in Kenny's offense as well, you see Sam's the first guy off the bench, second guy off the bench, and Ice is the 11th guy, 10th guy sometimes. So just figuring out that role and being more comfortable in that, I think, is something we'll continue to see. But like Jackson mentioned, he hasn't been able to be with the team as much because of the whole contract situation.
Sam, please hit some shots, please.
Yeah, 0-4 last night. Not a great start, but I do like that Kenny. He's the first or second guy off the bench. Kenny clearly wants to use Sam, and I think we're gonna get a big game out of him sometime soon. And I agree with everything both you guys said on Okoro. Let's be patient. He's figuring out a new role. He wasn't with the team, and yeah. That's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and a special thanks to James, as always, for joining us again today. It's always a great time to have him on the show. And Jackson will be hosting the watch party tonight on Playback and YouTube. He's going to be holding down the fort on his own. I will unfortunately be missing this game against the Wizards, so go ahead and jump in the chat and ask him some Star Wars questions. Get the ball rolling over there for him.
Yes, it should be interesting. Hopefully there's something to talk about with the game because, I don't know, the Wizards just aren't a particularly exciting
Could
team.
be a long night. You might run out of things to talk about in the second quarter.
Yeah.
Our guy, Bub Carrington, we can talk about it.
Yeah, Bub Carrington. We were going to do a Wizards preview, but we're running short on time. I figured we would get into Bub because, I've been a fan. I haven't gotten to watch the Wizards yet this season, and apparently I won't get to tonight either, but it is what it is. I'll have to catch up on Bub sometime soon. But again, James, thanks for coming on. Everyone, make sure you go follow him on Twitter, Everything Cavs. He does great stuff over there. Make sure you jump into Playback tonight, hang out with Jackson. And with all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree, go Cavs. Brian, do you want in on our Mobley exclusive texting group?